Hey guys, welcome back to Darkhorse Paranormal. Please like, subscribe, share and comment. So within our first episode, the Old Swan Vampire, we'll first start to begin by telling you a story from the late Tom Selman. As astonishing as it sounds, Liverpool has quite a history of vampires. At the junction of the city's Rupert Lane, Breck Road, Hayware Street and Everton Road, there lies the skeleton of a man who bit his wife, drank her blood, and until he had a wooden stake driven through him and was reinterfaced face down, allegedly rose regularly from his crossroads grave after dark to terrorise the women of Old Everton. This was all around 1680, and being a Lancashire man born and bred, Tom has in his files dozens of such reported incidents, right up to the present day. In the summer of 1866, a gory shock of murder took place in Liverpool at 14 Wood Grove, which now exists only as a weird carpeted cul-de-sac off Edge Lane beside a derelict garage. It was here in May 1866 one John Thomas Moss, an outspoken 27-year-old hater of the Christian religion, strayed with his beautiful 25-year-old cousin, Mrs. Nan Train, a woman who felt abandoned by her husband, Thomas Train, a ship purser. Moss was rumoured to be a vampire, and people have said they had seen his eyes light up like burning coals at the mere mention of Jesus Christ. However, women found themselves attracted to him, and some even offered to walk out of stable marriages just to wait on him. For many years, he lived in Sydney as a cigar manufacturer when something happened to him. For the John Moss who returned to Liverpool in the early 1860s was not the same happy young man who had gone to seek a fortune and a new life deep down under in Australia. There was a very strange story about a suicide attempt at the Albert Dock, and how his lifeless body, dragged from the salty mud at night by a watchman, was apparently revived by moonlight. This was one of the uncanny biological capabilities of a vampire. Mrs. Train had Moss as a lodger for a few years before he was to murder her. It was in the spring of 1866 she and her cousin moved from Elmvale in Bootle to Wood Grove in Liverpool's Old Swan. And even Mrs. Train's husband didn't seem to mind that Moss's constant presence. It appears that when the cousins were children, they vowed never to separate, and pricking palms and mixing the blood, they ritually sealed their promise. The only witness to the ghastly murder was a 20-year-old Margaret Goulding, the maidservant of Mrs. Train. She bravely stayed with her mistress as Moss followed his cousin around the Old Swan with a hatchet. Mr. Train, as usual, was away at sea, and Mrs. Train was slaughtered because she would not give him a ring to Moss, and more importantly, she would not desert her husband and marry him. He ranted on about hell and the Almighty, rejecting both, and the maid Goulding trembled as his eyes began to glow, as if they were on fire. Moss brought the hatchet down on his cousin's head, repeatedly taking off her nose, as the blade embedded itself deeply in her head. During one of the hatchet blows, Mrs. Train's eyeball flew out of its socket. The maid was so terrified she was unable to scream, and she found herself running down the stairs, almost in slow motion, as nerves got behind and the better of her legs. Behind her she heard what she would later describe as the sound, like that of a butcher's hatchet hitting bones. When the neighbours and the police stormed the house, they found Moss in an immense pool of blood on the kitchen floor. He had cut his own throat, and according to the coroner, Moss had known exactly which arteries to cut into his neck to effect an instant death. The rumours of vampirism and the stigma of suicide, deemed unholy in those times, and the brutal murder led to Moss's body being buried in unconcentrated ground between St. Anne's Church, Stanley, and the cow market. The body of John Thomas Moss was stalked, they say, with wood cut from the oldest tree, the Allerton oak in Calderstones, which still stands today, aged 1,000 years old. But, as you may not have guessed, that was not the end of Moss. Moss's caped form was seen over many evenings in June 1866, lurking in St. Mary's Cemetery, Kirkdale, the resting place of his beloved murder victim, Mrs. Train. A teenage courting couple kissing beneath a willow tree in the cemetery were attacked by their cloaked friend, but they both ran off and raised the alarm at a nearby inn. A small posse turned out to haunt the ghoul, who was seen jumping straight over a 5-foot wall at the cemetery, his cloak billowing behind him. He also stalked the young maid Margaret Goulding in December of that year. Speaking about the maid, she had been having terrible vivid blood-splattered nightmares in which she revealed the horrors of seeing her mistress being hacked to death. One night she awoke in her bedroom at a friend's house in Liverpool's Aigburth district, when she felt a strange urge to go to her window. Through a glacial fog, she saw a pale-faced man in a black wearing an opera cloak but no hat, standing on the pavement glazing up at her window. Margaret's heart almost stopped when she realised it was John Thomas Moss, because his eyes started to glow with a reddish orange tint. As she ran out the room, she heard the window rattling violently behind her, as if someone was trying to open it from the outside. But she was too afraid to look around, and she awakened the entire household with her screams. Understandably, Margaret's friend believed the poor girl had suffered nothing more than a lucid nightmare, caused no doubt by the traumatic memories of the horrific murder of her employer. But over the next 3 fog-bound nights, the evil-looking shade of John Thomas Moss was seen by other members of the household. John Thomas Moss was looking through a basement window of the house, and according to a neighbour, the cloaked stalker had even been seen on the roof of the Georgian dwelling, apparently tried to break open the skylight window. In the end, a local Catholic priest blessed the house, sprinkled holy water over the threshold, and gave Margaret a Bible and a rosary to keep on her bedside table. That seemed to do the trick, and Moss gave up his sinister pursuit of the former maid. The Reverend Thomas Garner, in Crumblings of St. Anne's Church, Stanley, which overlooked the site where Moss had been buried, staked and face down in an unmarked grave on a wasteland, warned his congregation in a chilling sermon about the dangers of scrambling to the dark powers of evil, as Moss had. Gardner talked of lost souls wandering the darkness after death, the demonic persecution and possession, and a nerve-jangling topic that was doing the round in this parish. People living within a mile of the site where Moss lay in his unchristian grave slept with crosses and hung garlic from their bedposts. And for many months the churches of the district became packed, and people sought divine protection from the self-rescued Moss. Eventually the vampire mania subsided, but even today there are occasional sightings of a solitary ghost in a cloak, who has been seen around the area of Liverpool Edge Lane, close to the street where Moss butchered his cousin and took his own life. Now you know, as well as I do already, that we at Darkhorse Paranormal will not just leave it like that. So, over this part, we'll be digging into it a little deeper. If we've got workings out and pictures, we will show you. Let's see if we're all to believe one story, or are we all to believe something that's not true? Or is it true and should we all be scared? Is this vampire lurking around the corner? So here we have a Mr. Thomas Garner, the local vicar and reverend. You'll see this guy before within our Adam Cliff podcast, where he was also the vicar, where William Cliff donated a lot of money towards the church, and he was also a slave merchant, just like John Moss. This is the church where Thomas Garner was the vicar of at the time, and also the place where John Moss is laid to rest, and also the place where William Cliff and his family are laid to rest. So as we run our minds through, we've come to realise that it does state that John Moss died the first time, and there could be a burial ground for John Moss around Egbert. This is the fun part. This is a little bit of behind the scenes and how we're coming up with information that we've just thought we'll add into this series, and you guys can let us know in the comments of how you feel about things. Do you want this part included again, or do you want us to leave it out? So, as we just all been sitting there talking about the story of Tom Selman with this vampire Old Swan, yeah, obviously we got lots of things. He died, He died. He got dragged out of the water, brought back to life. However, he was meant to be dead. So therefore, wouldn't you have another burial ground or another grave? How did he come into being involved in St. Anne's Church?
He broke out.
So he broke out of where?
St.
St. Anne's is a resting place.
Yeah.
So where did he break out of?
There.
So he broke out of the same grave in St. Anne's before he got put back.
Not St. Anne's, no.
So where was that? Another church?
Another church, yeah.
Okay.
St.
So-
Mary's.
Nope.
So what church did it then? Come on, we're just making it up. Come on. What church? This is all just for googles. What church did you meant to
No,
apparently
no.
break out of? Come on.
I forgot what's called.
You forgot what it's called, right? So there's a forgot
Saint.
what
It says. Yeah.
it says. Right, I get you.
St. Embrits or something.
You mean the church in Egbert,
Yeah.
which is St. Anne's in Egbert.
Yeah.
Right. However, this is where it gets confusing because there is a number of John Moss throughout the whole of Liverpool. If you Google it, you'll get a ship merchant roughly around the same time as John Moss, whose father also was John Moss, who's got a brother related to Moss, who was just,
And a sister.
yeah, whatever, the whole family,
Yeah,
right?
the whole
We get
family.
that, yeah?
Yeah.
So it's all done. It's all nice. We found loads of Moss families, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Not once, apart from a Tom Selman story, we've actually heard about this guy being a vampire. Even the church themselves, St. Anne Stanley, which we worked on with the other
What
podcast,
says he's a vampire?
they said he's a vampire, but
Yeah.
through a different story. And witness accounts, but don't forget, their vicar
Yeah.
was Reverend Garner. So they'll have got that in their history from Reverend Garner. So, what if, right? It's John Moss. Let's just go out here because it's all
Wasn't a
from giggles.
vampire.
He was.
Wasn't a vampire.
He was.
So what makes you say he was a vampire?
He was a vampire.
Why?
Because he was.
Because he was, right.
Because
So-
the guy in the church, why would he say he was a vampire?
Ah, I get you. This is the part that I'm trying to get on. Right? I love it because we're just all talking about it and how
But he
to.
was a vampire.
Okay, I get it. Vampire. Shut up.
Yeah, I know you're saying he was a vampire. I get that. And like obviously, if you pay, like through obviously documentary on.
But there is no
saying-
document.
Or whatever.
There is no document.
Stories on.
As part of Tom Selman's book saying
Yeah,
this
that he
guy
was a
is a vampire.
But even now, Tom, whatever his name, says he's a vampire. But could he be like an I'm trying to think what they're called. And somebody an
Cannibal?
yeah, could he be a
No.
cannibal
I
instead?
don't think he was a cannibal. Because why would you drink your own wife's blood?
Because he could have been a cannibal. Cannibals.
No.
No, you eat the meat when you're a cannibal,
Yeah,
not
you
the
drink
white
the
blood.
Why would his
Blood
eyes
as
glow?
well.
In the
Why
middle
would
of
his
the
eyes
dark,
glow?
and why would he have a cloak on the back of his back?
So what if?
This might be all hearsay though.
Exactly, because when you put in this guy's name, you come up with the legacy British slave merchants, you come up with everything about the railway, the whole lot, yeah?
Yeah, what?
Funny enough,
Yeah.
Mrs. Nan Train, in Tom Mellon's story, Train, the guy John Moss was a pioneer for the railway.
Yeah.
He followed that on from his dad, who was also called John Moss, which is hard. So this sort of stuff that we do behind the scenes that I thought I'll bring to you, and I hope you like. If you don't want us to include it, you don't have to. You just please let us know in the comments. I think it's quite funny personally, right? But think about it. What if the guy was actually a slave merchant, right? It's a big conspiracy. The guy's a slave merchant related to it. He started the trains. The local slave merchant.
Actually, it
There
was
was-
his dad who started it.
Okay, his dad started it, yeah, right. Okay, I love this. Right? What if the slave merchant that funded the church, St. Anne Stanley, in Old Swan, was friends with everyone else like Samuel Hilton, completely everything else, yeah? Paid the money to Thomas Garner, who done the wedding and everything else in the previous church beforehand, to come up with this story to get rid of a compare who, funny enough, right, this same compare John Moss here, right, has the New Star Line or whatever it was. What fishing company was it? He started the New Star Line. I think it's in our paperwork. I'll come back to that in a minute. What if it was all done to scaremong, sent out everyone else to get rid of a body where it's not recorded behind church walls to scare everyone off so no one will look into it for their own financial gain, just because, sorry to bid, and Adam William and all that cliff created the nurseries and everything like that. But to be fair, the trains are a lot bigger achievement to do than that.
Can we bury his body then? We soon find out.
What if it's not there?
Exactly.
Still to this day, if it's outside the grounds of the church and in between a cattle market, no one's got the grounds for that body. It's not in a church area, it's not in a private. You just know the body got moved from a park on Everton Road into a church as a skeleton. So if it was a skeleton when it got moved to the church, why would it need a stake through it?
But that's what I'm saying.
What's a skeleton then?
But that's what I'm saying. If they're putting something through his heart, he's not just a human being, he's a vampire.
But if they've done that to...
For their own financial gain.
Yeah.
So carry on with your opinion and what you feel.
I reckon he is a vampire.
I'm going to feel it could be just a cannibal.
So,
Not like flesh and blood.
so what we get, even though it could be a different family, and that's why the disclaimer is shown, a fourth son, James, founded the Moss Lane Shipping Company in Liverpool in 1864. And he became a joint stock company with the North Western Bank. So that was also around Egbert. You know, so you've got little bits that are there that we haven't covered and little history that we've covered about other people. Now we're not saying that these are related and it's the same John Moss. It could be a different John Moss. However, it could be a different family, you're right. However, there's nothing for this John Moss, the vampire, apart from Tom Selman's book. It was in 1860 something
1866.
that the guy died. However, Otterspool House was owned by a John Moss, a timber merchant. Over to by 1812, a fine new house had been built on the creek of Otterspool. The new occupier, John Moss, whose father, also John Moss, was established as a timber merchant in the later part of the 18th century, with a flourishing business near Southhouse Dock. The Southhouse Dock, which could relate to the story of someone going into a maze as a suicide attempt. On his death, John Moss Jr. inherited the business at the age of 23, which in turn expanded by opening a banking house. Once he had settled in Otterspool, he went to partnership with George Forward and turned the snuff mill into an oil mill. Embankments were built to give barges direct access to its factory. So that ties in with Tom Selman's story about the Albert Dock. Before he died, John Moss gave land on Egbert Road to the new Egbert parish to build St. Anne's. He was buried there in 1837. Thomas and Gilbert and his sons continued banking business, and another son, John, entered the ministry. A fourth son, James, founded the Moss Line Shipping Company of Liverpool and the bank stock market, which is the North Western Bank. Lark Hill was owned by the Haywoods merchants and bankers who made their money within the slave trade. Yeah. So we got that story. Some of that relates to Tom Selman's story. But we're not saying it's the same person. And I do have to keep saying that this is all down for you to think. Could be a different person. It absolutely could be.
No one knows.
Is there anything else that we've come across? Is there?
Yeah.
According to the British legislature, which we have called out for not spending or giving true information before in our podcasts, a Liverpool banker and a slave owner is an important figure in the early railway schemes. Son of Thomas Moss, which is John Thomas Moss. Funny enough, I don't know. Brother of Henry Moss and founder of the Liverpool Bank, Moss & Co. He has an entry under the ODNB as banker, railway pioneer and slave owner. I'll put pictures up in a minute. He joined his father's merchant firm in 1803, founded the bank and firm of Moss and Dales and Rogers in 1807. Thomas Moss and Sons had a small cotton estate called Craig Millen. It was abandoned in 1827. In 1822, Moss' dependent involvement, slave ownership, was triggered within his brothers Henry and James. He inherited 1,000 people in the Bahamas through his uncle James. So let's go back to the Bahamas. This is also the translation safe where Adam and William Cliff went through. Yeah?
Yeah.
He was in the process of moving them from his plantation on Crooked Island when he died in 1820. John and Henry Moss bought Anna Regina and the Lancaster Cotton Estate in 1823 for $10,000 in cash and a balance of $40,000 to be paid in crops. So he utilised the slave people as a condition to the licence to move them from the Bahamas. So we got that, yeah.
Yeah.
Under the deeds and lease of release between Thomas Brown of St Vincent and Houghton House, Yorkshire, at present residing at Hollywood's Coffee House, Strand, London, and John Moss, merchant in Liverpool, Thomas Brown conveyed John Moss and his plantations to the Crabbed County of St Vincent to secure his debt of $20,000 and upwards to Moss and the sums of money owed to James Moss, Moss the Younger and David Sudley, all of the islands trading under James Moss & Co. However, I do state the extent of the dependence of the family fortunes on slavery is unclear, but the family should be as to been in slave trade and the slave factoring. Thomas Moss, as timber merchant, ship owner, left the business to John and 3 sons, do not feature in David's Pope list of Liverpool slave traders and trust cities the ownership of slave ship Ellen between 1787 and 1790. However, the transatlantic slave trade taking place shows 14 voyages for Thomas Moss between 1784 and 1803. 3 voyages of Thomas and William Moss, and 2 for Thomas, William and James Moss. So this was done, they were moving straight away from the same place Adam and William were moving from when they were involved in the trade thing, slave, building up Liverpool. No matter what trade, this history is absolutely everywhere, right? So there's no history on this guy anywhere as a vampire. There is a few things I haven't been able to collect from murders and a number of murders in newspaper databases. I haven't been able to fund that at the moment and download it, we're being a new channel, but they are there online. So if they're classing it as murder, they're not classing it as vampirism or anything else. But to be fair, I do like the story of Tom Selman. It adds up. It gets rid of all this slave chat, hidden murder, hidden conspiracy, by just creating a whole vampire out the middle of it. Mrs. Nan Train, funny enough, it's got the word train.
Yeah.
Margaret Goulding was the nurse, or the could you say it was a servant at the time?
Yeah.
So I'm going to leave it to you just amongst yourselves. What do you actually think?
not alone, could it be a cannibal? Or could it be, actually, thinking about it, one of them 800 bodies that got dug up just before and then re-put down again?
Which 800 bodies that got dug?
By St. Anne's
Right,
Church, one, I think.
I know what you're talking about. Funny enough, is the 800 bodies that was buried under St. George's Hall to make way for St. George's Hall, because St. George's Hall used to be an asylum. They got moved and transported to Old Swan. Once they realised there was no deeds, they tried to find a way to get rid of all them people. Which, even if you want that, please put in your comments Old Swan mystery bodies, and we'll come up with the podcast for that while we're there. See, so even behind scenes, we're talking about things that we feel could make another podcast, and the viewers might like to hear about it. Carry on. This is about John Moss.
I still think he's a cannibal.
A cannibal.
He isn't.
I reckon he is. So
He's a vampire.
there you have it. Even between us all at Darkhorse Paranormal, there's
What do you
mixture
reckon
between
he is?
a vampire, a cannibal,
Could be anything,
a
can't it?
slave merchant, and let's just put it out there, what if he was a unicorn?
No, I don't think he was.
As said within our workings out, this is John Moss of Otterspool, who was the railway pioneer. He lived within Otterspool House. So there you have it. There's the story regarding the Old Swan Vampire. A little bit of our working out and some other history that we haven't published yet. Or if we should publish, you can feel free to mention in the comments. Join our community page on YouTube and comment and let us know what you think. Like, subscribe and comment as always, and thank you and good night. Don't let that vampire come to get you tonight.